Good morning. This is Chris Valka from the ION, Senior Director of Operations, and I'm here with Dalla, who currently resides in San Sepolcro, Italy, in the Tuscan Valley. It is not really a great privilege to be able to speak with you, John, as to get your perspective on kind of the human side of what we are seeing and the role of business in all of this. Your work as an author and as an ethics strategist. And as a founder of an organization that really is devoted to that, offers us a really unique insight. And so I really appreciate you taking the time to be able to join us. And so I guess my first question, I think many of us would be curious to know as to what is happening on the ground there. I mean, your perspective gives us more of a global insight, despite all the news that we hear. But you offer your own kind of personal take. So can you share with us for just a moment as to what's happening there?
Sure, Chris. First of all, we've been in lockdown for almost 4 weeks. So we're probably ahead of where North America is in terms of experiencing this virus head on. It has overwhelmed systems. Government has kept people quite calm. There's a lot of very good information that's being published every day. People are now into the rhythm. They know they can't go outside without a mask. We're only allowed to go out twice a week for grocery shopping, or if there's a medical emergency. If you have an aging parent or a child or something, there are exceptions. But the police and the Carabinieri, our version of the state police, have been quite serious about making sure people stay at home. And by and large, people have done that. The interesting thing is that thankfully, we live in this time with social media. There's been a real outpouring of community level support where people are reaching out, making sure that some of the people who are living alone or at a disadvantage in other ways are being taken care of. And we're seeing sort of this community continue to flower on the inside that is not allowed to actually do what Italians usually do, which is meet for a cappuccino and have big conversations about politics and everything.
Yeah, how does that work in Italy? I mean, social distancing, my trips to Italy, I mean, Italians are not really known for social distancing. In fact, they're really known for kind of invading space, I think.
Actually, the real discipline is Italians have learned to line up as a result of this. There are lines on the floors of supermarkets where you get in line for checkout, and people are incredibly courteous. So the one thing about Italians is that there is a living memory of the trauma that this country went through during World War II. And this was a country that was devastated. Most people don't remember because we think of the French D-Day invasion and all those other things that happened then in Germany. But Italy was devastated over 3 years of, daily battles that touched almost every village. So people remember that, and they remember what happened after the war. And after the war, ideologies went away and coalitions were created between business, between government, between religious groups. There was something called the Christian Democrat Coalition. And out of the values of the country, they rebuilt Italy and really went from a third world economy to a first world economy. And people today are talking about the same thing. That same memory is there. And they're saying, this is not going to be a time of recovery. This is a moment of rebuilding, of relaunching. And so where the politics have been quite divisive before, there's more of a conversation about how are we going to do this together going forward.
I think there's this real question about when we all go back to our routines. Are we going to want to go back to all the routines? Do we want, what are the changes that we see are necessary? I've been thinking a lot about how this is a moment for us to reclaim a more authentic expression of our own humanity. And so I wonder if you would speak to that and perhaps speak also to the role of business in helping us identify that.
So the two elements. One is that we've talked about globalization as ideas, and we've experienced globalizations because of trade, because of consumer goods, because of jobs. We're now experiencing the fact that each human being on planet Earth is vulnerable together, that none of us are so independent that we can hide from this virus. So it's going to be a tension. I don't, in the past when we've had crises, it's not always been clear how human beings would respond. But this is a moment where that recapturing of our humanity out of this shared experience of our vulnerability, which kind of happened after the Second World War and led to multilateral institutions like the UN, which have gone out of favor and have become bureaucratic and slow moving. It may be that this is a moment where again, we are galvanized to do something on a global basis. Perhaps thinking about our environmental responsibilities, for example, in a way that we haven't been able to come to agreements in the past because of this experience. From a corporate perspective, we saw what happened after 9/11. We saw what happened after the financial crisis, where there was a period where corporations needed public support to come back into the competitive kind of reality that they were used to. But at each of those relaunches, some of the disadvantage of the people who weren't participating fully in that economic boom became that much more pronounced. This is a moment where I think we actually have to not only change the way we do business, we have to change our imaginary. We have to change our governance, our strategic thinking, so that we're not only driven by one bottom line, but acknowledge what people have been talking about as that triple bottom line of our corporate responsibilities being interconnected with our social and environmental responsibilities. So I would think that this is a moment where, since especially governments are instrumental in bailing out corporations, that there should be a reverse responsibility, a reciprocal responsibility that says when we go forward, we're going forward in a new way where there's more inclusivity.
Yeah, so I was reading this morning on one of our more local newspapers on urban development, and they said in many respects what has happened in this time is that it has fast forwarded what was inevitable in terms of business, that the small business kind of mom and pop stores are now having a hard time competing with Amazon and its comparables. And so this is sped up the kind of the redistribution or kind of what's going to be happening with business today. And I keep wondering, in the world that I work in, and being able to help young entrepreneurs and startup businesses, often centered around technology and energy, how do these small businesses compete and make a contribution in the way that you've just outlined?
Well, I think a couple of things. One is I agree completely with this idea that this is a moment of great acceleration. And our challenge will be, we've always managed to accelerate technology, systems, efficiencies. We've not done as good a job of accelerating the moral responsibility that moves with those things. So in the technology sector, we know that a few years ago, Apple, Facebook, Microsoft, Google got together and actually created an Institute of Ethics for Artificial Intelligence. This is a moment where I think any startup needs to start not with their business proposition, but with their business proposition wrapped in social values. And if there is that cocoon of commitments to society, to the environment, to the future, then that becomes where these small independent enterprises interconnect and become part of a system of solutions, as opposed to just a freelancer doing it on their own. So we know that today's problems are systemic. We need to be thinking, how do systems work in technological innovation? And the thing that will bring some harmony or some cohesion to individual initiatives is when there's a group of shared values.
How do we do that? And we've got about a minute left, and maybe this is a good way. I mean, in a moment when we are so divided, when we are in fact isolated, how do we ever come to some sort of decision or kind of unity on these shared values?
I think that as a strategist, I was taught to differentiate my brand or my product by how this was different. And I would say that the one question I would ask is what difference am I making? So taking the notion of differentiation and turning it into a relational and social commitment.
Okay. Well, John, we really appreciate your time and certainly your perspective. All the best to you and your wife Lucinda, and all those in the community of San Sepulcro. We certainly are united in many respects, even though we are distanced from one another in this moment. So really appreciate.
And Chris, and what you all are doing in your venture at ION is just so important for our future. So I really wish you a lot of success with that, you and your colleagues.
Thanks a lot.